Welcome to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast, the show that offers you tips and strategies to help speakers build the business of their dreams. Now here's your host, 30-year industry veteran and business coach, Jane Atkinson.
Well, welcome everyone to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. I'm your host, Jane Atkinson, and from time to time over the past several years, we have invited my client, economic futurist Andrew Busch, to the show to help us unravel and make sense of what's going on in the world. Welcome back to the show, Andy. We need you so much right now.
Well, thanks, Jane. It's always good to see you and chat with you. You've been a great help to me in my career in speaking, so it's always fun to come on your show.
Oh, well, speaking of your speaking career as a keynote speaker, just tell everybody what you've been doing the past couple of years. What does your business look like today?
Yeah, it's really grown exponentially, as you can imagine. There's just a lot of
Yes.
chaos in the world, but I changed a lot of the things that I was doing, including incorporating a CRM, which really helped significantly. It allows me to handle a volume of business that I couldn't have imagined before.
So no more spreadsheets? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, nope. And it's really what it does is it organizes you in a way that you can stay on top of things, but also that you can do sequential reach out to clients and to
Yes.
stay really in touch with a lot of people. And that also helps with distributing the research that we produce here. So
Yes.
there's just a lot of really big positives, but the keynotes have grown rapidly over the last 5 years, actually, since I restarted the business in 2019. It obviously slowed down in 2020, but each year over the last 3 years, it's been a record year.
Oh,
And each year over the last 2 years, I've increased the fees significantly.
good.
So, doing a little less volume, but getting more revenue from it. So it's
Love
been
that.
fantastic.
I love hearing that. And I can only imagine that people, various industries would need you right now just to help them navigate what's coming with various things that are happening. But you actually worked during COVID in the Trump White House. Tell everybody what you did for them. Or was it during COVID? Or right
No, it wasn't. But it's actually so, yeah, to level set, I worked in the first Trump administration in 2017, 2018, and left in
Oh,
2019 before COVID hit.
okay.
Um,
Sorry, I got my dates mixed up.
no, that's all right. That's all right. And so I have nothing to do with the Trump administration now. This is a completely different group of individuals that are running things there with a lot of policies that I don't happen to agree with, as I'm sure most Canadians don't.
And
But there are some positive things that have come out of this, and I will talk about that both for Canada and for the United States. But
okay.
it is ultimately very chaotic, and this is why people hire me, is to come in and help them understand what's going on, whether it's executive orders or whether it's tariffs. We've got a lot going on in that space as well.
Yeah. And so we're going to focus in on the things that are going to be relevant and will affect the speaking industry. And
Hmm.
that's why I want you to talk about kind of what industries are going to be affected by tariffs and things like that. But I just really I've always appreciated your no nonsense approach to, well, this is the fact, and here's my interpretation of that fact. Because wouldn't you agree that finding out facts is rather difficult right now, depending on, and you probably lean Republican, which I think you've told people before. I would probably lean Democratic. And so my feed is filled with, I actually search stuff so that I get into the algorithm some things that would be oppositional to what my beliefs are. Um, like, where do you even go to get your news, Andy?
Well, first of all, I would not be hired if I wasn't very objective in what I do.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter personally where I sit with my views on politics. What my clients hire me for is many decades of experience within the private sector, but also within the public sector, and bringing an objectivity towards growth opportunities of what's coming out of policy changes, how they're going to impact companies, what that means for the economy, what it means specifically for companies, and how that translates into technological demands
Yeah.
as well. So there's a lot of moving parts to this.
Yes.
But I think that's the key for me is, I always have to tell people, look, I am right down the middle of the road. It's not neither left nor right. I think both sides have problems, to be honest.
Yes.
And that's really important for people to understand, because we're all trying to figure out, hey, where can we grow our company? How can we do positive things in this chaotic environment?
Yeah. And chaos, I mean, I don't know if everybody on one side of the aisle would agree, but I'm thinking everybody has to acknowledge that there's a lot of chaos.
Oh
And so we're
yeah.
here to help calm the chaos, people, okay? And this isn't about getting any kind of political view across, but I
No.
do appreciate the fact that you have had, White House exposure,
Mhm.
and that you have been able to kind of watch these things from a much more of an insider standpoint. Do you feel, my first question is really just a general one. Do you feel like the guardrails are kind of off for this administration?
This is a very different administration from the first Trump. So this is
Yes.
Trump 2.0 versus
The
1.0.
guardrails were so sternly in place that one. I mean, he just wasn't even accepted, right?
Well, no, I would say this. Well, first of all, the American people elected him the first time and they elected him the second time. So that's your
Yes.
starting point. So you have to
Yes.
understand that. The difference between these two administrations is that I think the first administration was a little bit of a shock to Trump himself. And
Yes.
the people that he brought in gave him more of a balanced view about his actions, and really could offer him advice that I think would be helpful when he would say things that would take him away from his ultimate end goal.
Hmm.
This time, they have end goals in mind, but they really don't have the personnel that would stand up to him and say, Mr. President, if you do that, that may derail your achieving your end goal. So I think there are many, many, many more loyalists in this administration than there were in the first administration. And I
Yes.
think that's the biggest difference. So from that standpoint, I think it's challenging. I think a lot of the personnel that they brought in are not well experienced.
No.
The scandal, I would say, is best word for what happened with
And
the Houthi strikes, and
that's just this week's news. I
yeah,
mean,
so
next
it's
week it's going to
super
be something
chaotic.
else. Yes.
But
Yes.
the last point I want to make to people is that this is a very well organized administration for what they want to achieve as far as their goals. They had 4 years to prepare for this, and prepared they are, and they're going after so many different aspects of either geopolitics or economics or just even the size of the US government. And I think there's a lot of things that are warranted. There are things that will come with great costs down the road.
Hmm.
But that's what you have to really think about when you're looking at President Trump, and what he's trying to achieve this time.
Okay, so let's talk about the speaking profession specifically. What areas do you see having kind of like a trickle down effect? I know that particular industries may have problems going forward because of tariffs and various things. Tell me what you see for the speaking industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great opportunity. I mean, I
Okay.
know that sounds kind of mercenary, but people need help right now. They need
Mhm.
help on a wide range of issues. It could be on trade policy. It could be on internal policy to help uh, your employees embrace the chaos and understand it, and then also find ways to interact with each other in positive ways. In the US, obviously, there's been an executive order against DEI. And what does that mean for companies? How is that interpreted? Can companies still have policies that would essentially promote the policies of DEI without saying they're DEI. I mean, I think we're seeing
Mhm.
some tech companies do that. So it's a reinterpretation of what's been going on, and people need help with that. They need to understand it. They need to find ways to help companies embrace their own particular mandates within the company of what they stand for. So
Yes.
I think from a speaking standpoint, it may on the surface seem, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Nobody's going to know what to do. On the other hand, within a really short period of time, people are going to say, we could use some help in that area. We need to
Yes.
better understand that. So I think there's just wide range of opportunities here for speakers.
Okay, I like that. And I think even in the DEI space, it's all about marketing and okay, what are we going to call it? Because people's cultures are still going to need to be inclusive,
Mhm.
right? So, do you have any more words about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, all the studies show is that the broader the tent of the people that you have underneath it, the more ideas that flow from that and the better ideas that come out of that. I
Yes.
think most companies have studied this and know this, but
Yes.
how do you get those people in the door? I will say this across, and I speak to the entire spectrum of the economy, whether it's technology, whether it's agriculture, whether it's manufacturing. I mean, it doesn't matter. Our process is applied to so many different industries. And what's fun
Mm.
about that is that I get to talk to the CEOs or the heads of these organizations. And when I do that, I ask them a lot of questions as a consultant would. And when I ask them about what their challenges are, almost every single one of them says talent management and finding the right people. And so
Yeah.
that's always going to be something that I think companies are going to need help with.
Yeah.
Speaking broadly, because I know that's where a lot of speakers land, in
Yeah.
motivating people. And how do you motivate them? How do you get them to move forward? How do you get them to communicate in a very different US environment and a different Canadian environment for that matter,
Yes.
as well? So these are all the things that I think are interesting. You just have to spend time rethinking how is this how can I rebrand some of what I've been doing over the years to make it align with what is happening today? And it's
Yeah.
really not that big of a stretch. You just have to
Yeah.
think through it in a positive way, and you can get there quickly.
Yes, I like that. I like that. So you mentioned Canada. Of course, we have to talk tariffs because, ouch,
Right? Elbows up, right? Elbows
elbows
up.
up. Talk about, let me explain that to people in case they don't know. Elbows up is a hockey term, and it's a way to protect yourself when you're playing hockey. And all Canadians, the one good thing that the tariffs have done for Canada is it has united us in the elbows up effort. And so I would say the people who just called an election, which, by the way, has a 31, I think it was 31 day like on ramp. I don't know if I have that number exactly right, but our election cycle is so very short, people. It is the most beautiful thing. You do not watch 2 years of negative ads. You watch like 3 weeks of negative ads and then it's done. But I will say there's a lot of confusion right now in Canada
Mm.
too about, who's going to deal with Trump better. That's kind of who we're voting for, is who we think will deal with Trump better. Um, Talk about what you know. I know there's like some big announcement happening about tariffs like tomorrow.
Right.
Changes on a daily and sometimes hourly basis. Tell us what you know about tariffs and how it will affect which industries.
Yeah, so let me state that from what we know already, there's 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum coming in from Canada. There's 25% tariffs on all autos that are not made in the United States. And there's discussion of a 20% tariff on all imports coming into the US. And
Okay.
essentially, what the Trump administration is attempting to do is reshape the global supply chain and really reshape global trade. Now, global trade has been going ever since really we got GATT, which is the Global Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, way back after Smoot-Hawley, which was this horrific um, tariff bill that passed in Congress in the 1930s and really hurt the US economy. It really hurt global economy. And that gap led into the WTO eventually, World Trade Organization. Now, there are reasons to reshape that agreement. China has, and Canadians know this as well, China's been cheating on that ever since they got in. And I don't think that's a shock to anybody. They've not
Right.
played by the rules. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. And so
Okay.
there's a reshaping that needs to get done there. There's a reshaping that needs to get done between the United States and the EU over VAT taxes. VAT taxes are not paid by domestic companies in the EU, and US companies selling in there have on average a 25 to 27% increase in the cost on their good that they don't get rebated, which is what these other companies are. So there's a lot of things like that that need to change. And so what I would say is, you know, this administration, the Trump administration, really believes in tariffs. And so I don't think these things are going away. They're not going to be similar to what we saw in the first Trump administration. So I think they're going to last longer.
Mm-hmm.
They're really targeted to address what Trump believes are imbalances or injustices
Yeah.
within the global trade structure. So I think that's one of the key takeaways from this for people to understand it. Now, I will say this, there are some really good things that have come out of that. One of the first things that I saw, and I'm not promoting either candidate in Canada, but who would have thought that a liberal candidate would have said, we need to reduce regulations across all the provinces? You would never have seen that, or take away the gas tax, right? Or the gasoline,
Carbon
not
tax.
gasoline, the carbon tax, sorry, carbon
Yes.
tax, the
Yeah.
GHG tax, right? I mean,
Yes.
that is shocking. I mean, some of that is very helpful, I
Yes.
think, overall. And I believe Mark Carney said, look, if we really reduce down these regulations just amongst the provinces and made free trade among the provinces, you
Mm-hmm.
would not have to worry about the tariffs from the United States. And so it's stuff like that that I think really opens up your eyes. It really opens up the economic aperture as to some of the positive things that can happen. I apologize for Trump saying 51st state. I think that's just totally wrong. I also think it's wrong to be looking at Greenland. I think
Yeah.
that's wrong as well.
Yeah.
In my lifetime, I've never seen or understood the United States in peacetime really trying to take over another country like that. It's
Yeah.
really odd to me. It doesn't leave a good taste in my mouth. So,
I would think it should
but
be
like I said,
alarming. It should be alarming
yeah,
to everybody.
yeah,
Um,
and you're starting to see, like, there's a vote in the Senate that's coming up, that's asking for senators to take a vote on whether or not the tariffs against Canada should be removed because there is no fentanyl really moving across the border. It's not a national emergency.
it was an
So
excuse. It was an excuse. And
yeah,
he kept coming back to this horrible, horrible deal that we had with Canada.
yeah,
Didn't he make the deal? He was the
he
one that made the
did,
deal in what,
he did.
2018 or something.
And
So
it's very successful. That's the
huge.
other thing. I
This
mean,
is
I think on average the tariffs were about 2%. So um, you can look at it through the lens of that USMCA. It needs to get renegotiated over the next year, and so this could be opening salvo for that. But it's so disruptive. I think the BBC did a wonderful analysis of a car part that went from Canada to the US to Mexico to the US back to Canada. I mean, it went back and forth 8 times. So if you start to think
wow.
about tariffs on that, it's absurd. So what'll happen in the Senate? They'll vote on it. We'll see if it won't pass. But if enough Republicans sign on, then maybe that sends a signal. There's other things that are going on in the courts which are encouraging in that sense. Pushing back against some of the policy moves by the Trump administration. But I would just say this, look, like there are some things that really do need to be addressed. Unfortunately, it's a sledgehammer right now. We'll see if it moves back to a scalpel at some point.
Or a chainsaw. And
Yeah,
as
yeah,
and,
chainsaw.
and as a Tesla owner, I have to tell you, I am pissed. Like he just destroyed the brand and destroyed any value that anybody had in their vehicles. And so I this is the first time I've ever said that publicly.
Mm,
Nowadays you don't even want to admit that you drive a Tesla, but it's a hell of a really good car, people.
yeah, yeah.
And I feel so sad that all of these things are happening because of the leader of the organization being in charge of Doge. Is he really stepping down from Doge?
Oh yeah, he's got to. I mean, Tesla's stock has sunk significantly, and you see the protests that are going on not only in the
Yeah,
United States but around the world. And so
yeah,
he's got to refocus back on his company. And
yeah.
I know his shareholders are very
Well,
disappointed.
that's what
Um,
I'm thinking. That he's
yeah,
got to, people have to feel it. And I feel as though that unfortunate, there's going to be so many people feeling these things, just people who own cars that are, happen to be Teslas. They're getting vandalized and that's not their fault. And then people who are maybe at the other end of the tariff wars, all the California wines, all the American booze was taken off of the liquor store shelves here in Canada. And who's that going to affect? That's not going
right.
to affect Trump. That's going to affect all of the wineries in California. And I feel awful for that. Like, we are your friends. We do
Oh
not
yeah.
want any of this. This is
No.
just bad all the way around.
Well, here's the thing, right? So for the US, and I don't want to sound like a flag waving US guy, but honestly, the trade with Canada, as far as it negatively impacting our exports, it's really small. On the other side of the equation, Canada's exports in the United States would impact your GDP by 2%. I mean, that's big, right?
Yeah.
So I'm talking a percentage change, right? So it will negatively impact Canada more than it will impact the United States
Yeah.
in that sense. But there's a timing mismatch with what the Trump administration is attempting to do. They believe that they want to move manufacturing back to the US, they want to
Yes.
rebalance trade and so on. It takes a long time to build a manufacturing plant in the United States.
Yes.
It takes a long time.
Yes.
We're talking like years. And
Yes.
the other thing is, what's really hard about this for both the US and multinationals is, do you really want to build a plant in the United States when you're forced to, and when a new administration that comes in would change policy? And that's
Mhm.
that's the problem
Yeah.
with a lot of the spending bills that were passed in Congress, the Chips and Science Act being one of them, the Inflation Reduction Act being the other one, is that they have subsidies, they have big spending bills that encourage businesses to build in the US. But what happens if that goes away, or if it's slowed down or stopped, which is to some extent what the Trump administration did with a lot of things. So
Yeah.
then you create this uncertainty, and it's the uncertainty that's really drying up spending. Consumers are feeling really bad, all ranges, low income, middle income, and upper income. Business
Hmm.
surveys are tanking right now. And what you're seeing is just what we call opacity, or just it's not clear going forward what this means and how it's going to play out. So what do people do when they're uncertain? Well, two things. They turn to other people for help, like me and it's other speakers, which is great.
Yes.
The other thing that they do is they don't do anything.
They
They
don't spend
just
money.
they don't spend any money. They don't make any plans. They don't build new plants. I mean,
Mhm.
that's the problem. And so this is in the sense that when you're looking at the economy, and like, let's say autos, you probably have 3 months of supply of autos sitting on dealers' lots right now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
those are going to start to roll off, and so eventually you're going to have to get to a situation where the price of those cars and autos and trucks are going to go up. And do they go up by 25%? No. But you know what happened the last time we had tariffs with the Trump administration? Washing machines, right? They did 25% on them, I believe. They went
Yeah.
up by 12%. Domestic prices did, by domestic suppliers.
Yeah.
So they're going to raise prices. So it's just it's not good. The other thing that's really bad about this is it picks winners and losers, and that's what I really don't like, because that's when the government gets involved significantly, and they start saying, "Oh, we should bail out those farmers because they're getting unfairly targeted," or "We should bail out these tech companies because," and go down the list, right? And who's got Trump's ear? That's where you get into problems, and
Yeah.
that's my old conservative maybe you call it Republican, Ronald Reagan kind of approach is like, well, I don't like that. I'd rather have less government than more. So there's a lot of stuff that are at odds within this administration. But again, to sound somewhat upbeat, I do think there's a lot of positive things that could come out, not only for the speaking business, but also for companies that are really trying to understand this and then take advantage of the opportunities that come.
Okay. So if, I really want to talk about the price of eggs and like the person, the consumer on the ground. Do Americans need to worry about losing their Social Security? Like there's just so much fear about a lot of things. Talk a
Right.
little bit about the things that we're fearful about and also how much your grocery bill is.
Yeah, so the egg thing is not really something that the Trump administration is doing. That it has to do with bird flu, right? And just the culling of so many birds in the United States. That's the problem.
I'm saying eggs, but what I really mean is grocery bill.
Right,
And I
right.
feel like that was the promise they gave, but they've done everything but that since they got into office. So I do get a lot of people don't understand like the dynamic of bird flu, and you've studied disease, so you
Right.
really understand bird flu and how that's, the price of eggs is not coming down anytime soon, probably. But talk
Well,
about
it's yeah. Let me. It's come down, right? So but it's not $9, like a carton anymore, right? So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
coming down. But here's the thing. This is what drives me crazy about when people talk about inflation and on CNBC or other television stations. What they say is, oh, the rate of inflation is slowed, but it's just kind of hanging out between 2.5% to 3%. And I say, yeah, but prices went from here to way up here. And so low income, middle income consumers were very upset about that. And so I think that's one of the reasons why, well, clearly it's one of the reasons why former President Biden lost to President Trump, is because they were very upset about the cost of food, the cost of housing.
Mhm.
All prices just have gone up significantly over Biden's administration. And it doesn't matter if you have a 4% unemployment rate or a relatively low unemployment rate. If people feel bad because their income levels are not matching the inflation levels, you got a problem politically, and you also have a problem with the economy. And so,
Right.
yes, the Trump administration promised that they would get prices down and that they would make more jobs available here in the United States. But again, there's a mismatch on this to some extent of timing, whether they can be successful when moving businesses back here and driving demand for jobs, which would drive labor costs up, but it also would drive incomes up, right? That's what you would want with inflation relatively stable. That would be great, but that's not what's going to happen when you throw tariffs on. I mean, it's not me bashing the Trump administration for this. It's
No.
simply economics. And we've seen this studied forever, ever since Smoot-Hawley, since the 1930s. There's millions and millions of studies done on this stuff, or I shouldn't say millions, but really literally thousands of studies have been done on this, and it's proven time and time again what happens when you put tariffs on. It's just not good.
Well,
It's what we call import substitution, right? Smaller countries try to do that. They say, well, we don't want those imports from the US. We're going to put a bunch of high tariffs on. We're going to try to build up our own industries in that. It never works properly. It just
right.
doesn't.
And it just takes so long that by the time you get around just thinking about building a manufacturing plant, there's a new administration in and everything's changed.
That's right. That's right. So it's
Okay.
it's bad in
Talk
that
about
sense.
Social Security, because I'm sure there are people who are very afraid of what's going on in that.
So this is tied to some extent, if you're looking at fiscal spending in the United States, this is another major problem that's creating uncertainty, right? So we're running deficits here of about $2 trillion a year. The Trump administration, along with the Republicans in Congress, have several spending bills and tax cut bills that are combined, and we'll see if they can get them passed. But they would add another approximately $750 billion a year onto that $2 trillion. So we're talking about like almost $3 trillion a year of deficits. And so that's where things start to get really ugly really fast. And so what I'm advising clients is I'm saying, look, I knew things would be fairly chaotic at the beginning of the Trump administration, but I thought, oh, they'll get through the first 2 years, they'll get a tax bill done. I did not anticipate this aggressive nature, not only with Doge, but specifically with tariffs. So now that calls into question my call, but I was saying after 2027, the back half of the Trump administration, the last 2 years, that's really got me worried as far as economic growth goes and as far as things like Social Security. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but the Social Security Trust Fund will run out in the United States by 2033. And what's interesting about that is that, so I think we can continue down this path of deficit spending for a while, but it's going to get so bad. And we're talking about going from about maybe $33 trillion in debt to over $50 trillion in debt by 2033 on that. So with Social Security, what happens is once the trust fund runs out, it's an immediate 25% cut across the board. So that will focus the mind of a lot of politicians to do something about it. And in the United States, the last time we did something was back during Ronald Reagan, when we had a Democrat House. Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House, and Reagan, and they came together and compromised, and they raised the retirement age for U.S. citizens, which is exactly what they should be doing now, but no one has the guts to do it. And so we'll see what happens. But yeah, we have, the thing about the US is we have the taxing authority to deal with this. Like we could do it, right? And we can greatly reduce down our budget deficits just to stabilize things. But no one wants to raise taxes right now.
No.
And they're going in the opposite direction, which is just absurd, I think, from a fiscal standpoint.
Okay. A great calmer downer. It's not working this time, Andy.
No, I just think you have to be realistic, right? In your optimism. And you have to say, okay, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? Where's the opportunity from that? Well, there's a lot of places there are opportunities. One of the biggest drivers of spending in the US is in Medicare. And what do we spend a lot of money on in Medicare? Diabetes. And that comes from, obviously, a lot of factors that go into diabetes, but it's mainly being not at the right weight. And so with Wegovy and other drugs like that, there's a potential for that to be addressed. So those are things that are possibilities that could really enhance and reduce down some of the spending. And let me just say this about Doge. Like in the US, the size of the federal government has grown so dramatically. Besides the 12 cabinet posts or 15 cabinet posts there are 400 independent agencies in the United States that are spending enormous amounts of money. And so having worked in government, I will tell you, there are wonderful people working in government and very dedicated. But I will also say that over time, there's a lot of people that aren't. And so I would say it's great to clean house. And because so much of the US government is unionized, it's really difficult to do that. So I would say, from my standpoint, like if you're really trying to change things and trying to change the way that the US government functions and make it more efficient, well, Doge is a possible answer. It's ugly. There's a lot of things that I don't think we should be doing from a standpoint of health. And stuff at the HHS and NIH that are very worrisome. The measles outbreak is really a problem, I think. But there's other things that I think really make sense. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. When you're looking at all the craziness that's going on, there's some reasons for it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I know it's hard to see that. The thing is, like, just take a step back and go, okay, let's take the opposite case. Like everybody's saying, oh, this is terrible, everything's bad. What happens if Musk and Doge is successful? That's the question no one's asking, right? And that's what I'm wondering, and I spend time thinking about.
Play it out for me. Tell me what.
Let's say we make the U.S. government a lot more efficient at what it does. Let's say we can utilize technology to do that. Let's say we can not have as many people working there and taking away, resources from the private sector to do that. Let's say we can make things flow a lot better, make approvals quicker. Like as an example, one of the craziest things is trying to get a nuclear power plant up and running in the United States. It takes 9 years right now because of all the regulations. In France, I think they just throw a switch, or in China for certain. And that's
Yeah.
we have a massive power need in the United States. In Canada does too as well. But I mean,
Yeah.
from an electricity standpoint, so it's reducing down those type of regulations to make the economy more efficient, that it gets masked in all of the dust up over all these different issues that are going on. And that's why people hire me.
Get it. I get it, because helping people unravel all of this. Um, Talk a little bit about like some specific industries where you might see opportunity based on, okay, so let's say a speaker talks about change or managing change, managing chaos, whatever it might be. What are some of the industries where you could see there being a lot of potential? By the way, are you seeing any decline in conferences?
Not yet. Although I did
Think it
have
might
my
be coming.
it could be slowing down a little bit, but
Okay.
again, I'm probably not the best person to
'Cause you're
talk to
busy
that.
because of your topic. Yes.
Yes, because of what I do. I know within obviously the DEI community, that's gone down significantly. I've talked to some
Mhm.
people who build websites and work with speakers along those lines, and they've said, yeah, those people are hurting for sure, and things are
Mhm.
slowing down. Um, so it's a little bit different for me, but I would say it makes sense. Getting back to the point that I was making earlier, right? What do people do when they're uncertain? Nothing.
Yes.
They delay. So my guess would be that the time between when somebody wants you to come speak and the time that you're going to speak is going to be shortened significantly, because people are going to be waiting till the last minute to
And
book.
we saw this during right after COVID and things like,
Yep.
we saw those timelines going shrinking. Okay, speak to industries where there is opportunity. You mentioned pharmaceutical already, and
Energy is going to continue to be a really a big
energy.
driver. I've done a lot of work with energy companies. I was just working with a big company down in Florida, a major electricity producer down there. But why is that occurring? Well, because it's AI, right? Because AI needs a lot of power to run their models. And to do that, you need a lot of electricity. And so, how do we generate that electricity? Um, Canada has a lot of resources when it comes to doing that, wind and water. But in the US, obviously, the president signed an EO against wind. Solar will probably get a lot better, but we need to generate a lot more power. Those alternative resources are not going to get the job done. So we need natural gas and we need nuclear power like now.
Yes.
And
Yes.
in so that's an area, and it cascades out from there. We need to redo the grid. We need to make it more reliable. Here's another thing. Bad news is good news for some things. Really bad news on the environment, in the sense of nothing is going to get done on climate.
Yes.
Like I don't want to sound down about this, but like this is reality. No one's going to fix climate right now. So what does that mean? It's likely to continue to get worse, in the sense of the storms that we're seeing are going to have much more power behind them and stick
Yes.
around. And so what does that mean? Well, where's the opportunity there, Andy? That's really bad. No, it's not. It's talk about resilience building and resiliency, and creating resiliency in all of the structures around us. That's in construction, that's in architecture, that's in supply chains as well. Where are your main suppliers? Are they in China? Well, you better rethink that, right? You need
Mhm.
China plus one. But then also, if they're in the United States, you need to think, well, where are they located? Are they all, on the Gulf Coast? Well, maybe you should move that out of there, right? And just as an
Mm.
example of unusual kind of nature is, I'm down in North Carolina,
Yes.
and we had Hurricane Helene come through and devastate the mountains. Now that's
Yes.
really unusual,
That
and
hasn't happened, right? Since
I,
ever.
I, yeah, I can't even think about a storm doing what it did. Now
Yeah.
there was one pharmaceutical plant that was in North Carolina that made, I believe they made test tubes, right? And they were the sole supplier in the United States, and they were shut down. Now it's a great example of supply chain, inadequacy, shall we say, or brittleness. And that's why, like, when I talk to companies, like these are definitely areas in which they can improve upon. And get better at. So just off the top of my head, these are things that cascade all through the economy in a lot of different areas. So there's a lot of work to get done here.
There is a lot of work to get done here. Okay, so your homework from today, listeners, is to probably listen to this one more time and really try to pick out some of the areas where you could potentially see opportunity for your topic based on what's going on. So much in the areas of change and uncertainty. If you're an economist, great. You're probably going to be writing this out quite nicely. The last thing I want to mention is that people crossing the border, the Canadians who have been coming to work in the United States are going to need to shore up their visas and make sure that they're doing everything legally. I'm a little bit nervous for our industry from that perspective because we've been hearing a few things happening already in that regard.
Yeah, and I get to come up to Canada soon, so that should be interesting. I have lost at least one speaking gig because I'm being an American. I know of this, so that's interesting to me. Never seen that before, obviously. But I would be remiss if I didn't say, look, I understand people being very circumspect about coming down here and being very careful in what they do. There are some scary things going on when it comes to ICE and students, shall we say. But even I believe there was a Canadian woman who was detained in California for 2 weeks, right? That was pretty scary stuff. But really, really be, have your knowledge of where you're going, where you're staying, right at your fingertips. As a matter of fact, one time I was going into Canada and I didn't have the name of the hotel I was staying at, and they pulled me aside. This was going into Canada, and they like ran through all my stuff to make sure, like, who is this guy and whatever.
You're gonna marry a Canadian woman and try to work here, dude?
Yeah. But I mean, the thing is like it cuts both ways, I think, and you just need to have your information handy for sure.
And let me just add on to that, have the name of a good immigration attorney in your back pocket for when you're traveling.
It's good idea.
Well, Andrew Busch, thank you once again. We've had way more to talk about this time than any of our previous occasions. And circle back, we talked during COVID. We've talked during, I think, maybe beginning of a recession and talk about recession proofing. And I just really believe that you are indeed our great calmer downer. And I thank you for your time today. I know you're super busy, so thanks for sharing with our listeners.
It's my pleasure, Jane, anytime.
And if you're then listening and you have a comment, some feedback, let me know, jane@speakerlauncher.com. I would love to hear from you. And with that, we are going to say bye for now, wealthy speakers.
Thanks for listening to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. If you need help building the speaking business of your dreams, head over to wealthyspeakerschool.com and take advantage of our 20-minute next step call. Thanks for listening to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast.